Start the record off here. All right. So welcome everyone. This is a special event for the Design Advocacy Group that's taking part sort of under the auspices of our Streeteries working group. It's a group that began in the fall of last year, meeting and discussing ideas about streeteries and design and what these things look like and where these things go and how we transition from pandemic conditions of necessity to amenities and positive spaces for the future of Philadelphia. So we're going to get into it. I'll do my quick DAG plugs. March 24th is our next meeting. There's a link on the website that you can go see for Rebecca Chan from the Rail Park. So go check that one out. Excuse me. And then, yeah, let's get off and running here because we have a lot to cover. So first off, let me introduce our panel. I'm going to have each of them go through and say a few words about themselves to get us started. Sorry. Of course, my voice goes right at the beginning. So we have Beige Berryman, the art and design manager from Philadelphia City Planning Commission and also the director of the Arts Commission. Mario Gentile, founding partner, studio director, Shift Space Design. Prima Gupta, VP for Parks and Public Realm at the Center City District. David Wong, founder and the managing member of Frida. And Ben Falecha, who's the senior director of operations from the PA Restaurant and Lodging Association. So Beige, why don't you kick us off sort of who you are, what you do, and how sort of streeteries affect you and your day-to-day life.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Beige Berryman, the art and design manager at City Planning. And as part of this role, I'm also the Art Commission director. And throughout these various roles, I get to review different components of our commercial streetscapes, including facade review, sign review, impact on the public realm of large developments that come through civic design review, as well as smaller storefront improvements that come through the Commerce Department storefront improvement program. So just very committed to having a vibrant public realm in Philadelphia.
Thank you. Mario?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Mario Gentile. I'm the studio director for Shift Space. We're a multidisciplinary design studio based here in Philadelphia. We focus on architecture, placemaking, and product design. And I think the relevance to the Streetery projects are our parklets that we've developed for and through the city of Philadelphia, as well as we've piloted programs for the city of Atlanta as in addition to that.
Prima?
Good evening, I'm Prima Katari Gupta. As it says on the board, I'm Vice President for Parks and Public Realm at Center City District, but I'm also Executive Director of the Central Philadelphia Development Corporation, which is our membership organization that you should all join. We were sort of involved along the sidelines in the development of parklets, really kind of as advocates and folks that sort of did test fits. And why I think that they're important and why it's been such a meaningful project for us all to be a part of is, cities are what bring us together. And when we couldn't be together, this was this great and nimble innovation that allowed us to be together. So we're, very much committed to seeing how it can continue and evolve.
Thank you. David?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm David Wong. I'm the co-founder of Frida in Philadelphia. We are a community space located at 320 Walnut, and we serve breakfast, lunch 7 days a week. But most importantly, we offer a program of activities and events with a mission to bring people of all ages together within our space.
Thank you. And Ben? You're muted.
And 2 years in. My name is Ben Fletcher. I'm the Senior Director of Operations for the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association. The PRLA is based in Harrisburg, but I'm a Philly born and bred guy. I operated restaurants in the city for over 20 years before I joined the PRLA full time. And the PRLA represents, supports, protects, and promotes the entire hospitality industry, from restaurants and hotels to events and caterers, country clubs, amusement parks, DMOs like Visit Philly, Visit Pittsburgh, etc. So anything under that hospitality umbrella. We've been working with the city very closely for the past couple of years to get this outdoor dining. It was a true lifesaver for the restaurants in Philadelphia during the early parts of the pandemic, and it's continued to allow restaurants to survive. We lost about 20% of our restaurants across the state during the pandemic. We did have some silver linings with restaurant revitalization funds, the CHIRP grants, PPP, but just because these restaurants are back open, and just because you might not be able to get a reservation at your favorite spot, does not mean that we're back, right? It's going to take years and years for this industry to recover, which is one great reason why we have these streeteries. But I'm a Philly guy. I like to go out and I like to see them, and I like to see how they bring activity to spaces, and I think it's just been fantastic.
So we have some great panelists here. They span sort of the entire realm of this process. But our goal for this evening is to be interactive and to get feedback from the community and in the form of comments and questions. So what we're going to do is we're using Miro tonight. I just dropped a link there in the chat, so feel free to click on that and dive right in. So you can see here we have a few exercises set up. Kat's going to preview them, but we wanted to give you a chance. Oh, Nate is first off the gun. So Kat, why don't you talk a little bit about the process for DAG, city engagement, and then we can intro this software while people are figuring it out.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. I'm Kat Kendon. Eli and I have been working very closely on this initiative around design of the streeteries. And I would say this came to our group early on when they were actually moving towards more permanent legislation around the streeteries. Someone from the city's hospitality working group reached out to me and said, I think this might be something that needs some attention around design. So of course, reached out to Eli and we jumped on it right away, and have been engaged now, I don't know exactly how long, 4 to 6 months, on working through everything that can make these streeteries more something that elevates the city of Philadelphia, instead of what we have now, which may be a little bit more rundown shed look. We can elevate the design with a little bit of consideration and support of the city legislation. So we've been working through looking at existing examples of the streeteries, thinking about our own concerns, and pulling those things together. Now we're moving into a phase to engage stakeholders, and a lot of you are part of that example. So again, with everything going on with the legislation, a lot of what the city is more focused on is logistics, and they've kind of left out this part about design. They seem willing to let us interject, but we're in the process of putting together what that might look like. So as Eli said, if you click on that link in the chat and look over at the Miro. Let's see. So we're on this gray field. So you can click on any sticky note and click 2 times and you can start typing. There's some prompts in there. And I've also put some shortcut cues up at the top. So you can scroll with control and plus and minus. You can drag the whole.
You went on mute, Kat.
There's some cues at the top for you, some shortcuts. and just hop on there and give us some feedback. What's the best streetery experience you've had? What do you think makes a streetery look great? Again, remembering we're thinking about the design of these things. And what's something we can improve, or what's a favorite idea that you've seen? So we're going to give you a couple minutes in here to give us some feedback. If you want to copy and paste the sticky note because you don't see one, we can have as much feedback as you guys have.
And if you're having trouble accessing the link, or you just don't want to, that's also what the chat is for. So please feel free to add any comments, questions, answering these questions about your best streetery dining experience, things to improve upon, what makes a streetery look great, and the favorite design idea. Feel free to throw those in the chat. We'll call those out as they come in as well.
And I'll say, if you're using a cell phone, I'd recommend just going in the chat. It's felt a little hard for me to navigate on Miro in a cell phone, so it should be chat friendly. While you guys are browsing around in there, I'm gonna read through some of the considerations that DAG has already thought about as we're thinking about improving the design of these streeteries. In terms of design, we want to think about how open they are, physically open, and how transparent they are to be able to be seen through. Are they using greenery or landscape design? Can we offer some suggestions that come in at different budgets? And how do they look from the sidewalk, and as opposed to how do they look from the street? What's the height and the visibility from the sidewalk? What sort of color palette are they using, and style, materials? Do they have a roof or not? Are we going to support signage? And then big concern for the city, how can the design support the ability to be disassembled, removed, or demolished when it's needed? And should the streeteries be aesthetically, have some aesthetic continuity with each other?
George, once you're in there, you should be able to just start clicking around. You shouldn't have to activate your cursor. You should be able to just go about and start clicking. Everything should be locked other than those sticky notes. But if you want to grab one, Control-C, Control-V as normal, you can paste and move and bring things to other places if you want there as well. So you want to talk about this one as well, as we're starting to get a good amount of people who are in the document.
Sure.
So I'll run over here. We can. We're starting to get those filled out. Philip, I know you brought this up before. Do you wanna unmute and talk a little vermin? I know that's a big one for you.
Yeah, sorry. You saw me drafting something. You were spying on me. I didn't realize that was live.
Everybody's live. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I worked in a streetery, one of the big shed ones in Center City, over summer and the beginning of fall before I took my position at the Commerce Department. I've always waited tables in between professional gigs. I love it. It's always been a good way to make a quick buck. And my particular big streetery shed, it had like a raised decking platform that probably levitated like 5 inches above the asphalt, and it was completely and totally infested with rats. They were visible to customers, they were very visible to employees, and they would be, poisoned by our guy, and then they would die underneath the decking, and there was no access panel or way to get rid of them. And so, as you could imagine, that smells in the summer heat. The smell would attract flies, and so now you have a fly problem. And so I would recommend that any recommended streetery design do away with any hiding spaces that rats or other vermin could hide in. So any planters are great, but if they can be made out of a material that doesn't have any holes in them so that they could burrow in the holes. Any platforms should have access panels included so that they can't make little homes in there that are inaccessible to cleaning or, removal. So just things to keep in mind.
Thank you.
That's
I want to throw into Mario, talking about barriers. Aaron brought it up in the chat. I see it coming on some of the sticky notes. You've had some success coming up with barrier solutions that were attractive and had some, but also had some strength.
We have, exactly. So this is one of the I guess the workarounds that we had to deal with when we first came up with parklets. So one of and this is what we worked through with the streets department a lot, to have them help them understand what barrier protection could be swapped for. So instead of the Jersey barriers and railings, our designs use planters. So our planters had a certain depth and a certain height, which allowed us to not have railings and also provided the strength of Jersey barriers in the event that they were hit by impact, which was approved by the city and served its purpose well. A couple of them, a couple of the ones in West Philly, I think, had gotten bumped before. So I think I don't know how fast those cars were going, but I mean, I think it's a simple solution, just being able to sort of swap those Jersey barriers for larger planters.
Yeah, I think there's been some good examples of that around the city that we've seen and we've explored. David, as someone who has used a planter style approach at Frida, I want to talk about a little bit where that came from and where that design initiated.
I wish Thomas would be here because he's the person who came up with the idea. As a small business, we had to figure out a solution that took into account the cost of the construction. Bearing in mind that, we sell the most expensive item on our menu is $15. So there's no alcohol there. And then, Thomas, obviously being himself, came up with the yellow planters. Obviously, the yellow color is very visual, can be seen from very, very, very far away. Think about the cost of buying a rubbish bin, which is very inexpensive. You can buy it from, I shouldn't make any advertising, but any of your local hardware stores sells them. So the color was important. The size of the rubbish bin, talking about barriers, was important because they're filled not only with dirt, but also with bricks to make them heavier. The railings that he used is this massive piece of wood that one person can barely lift. And so he came up with this solution at very low cost, very visible, and adding plants and greenery was also an important aspect, for us. For the look, for the aesthetics. That said, I'm sure some of you may disagree with the aesthetics of the end result. We had a lot of pushback from the community members who live in the neighborhood, who thought that it was just plain ugly, and they pressured us to remove them because they didn't like the color of the planters. And they like the fact that the planters were actually rubbish bins.
So Ben, I think tossing over to you, we're in this pivot mode of this was a necessity for a while. Now it's moving to something that is a public benefit and can become a benefit for these businesses. How was, you know, I know you're here to sort of speak for your constituency, but how are the restaurant owners that you're talking to dealing with that pivot and the idea that something that was one way is going to be something a different way, and then maybe another set of regulations, and how are they talking about designing these things and putting them together in a way that they hope will last?
Yeah, you know, the discussions are just really beginning, Eli. You know, we were frankly blindsided by the regulations. We didn't see them until last week. They were published in the Inquirer and the public comment pages on February 11th. And so we just started wrapping our heads around them a little bit. At first, so the legislation that was passed at the end of last year, it wasn't perfect, but it was good. It saved probably about 70% of the existing streeteries in Philadelphia. And we've seen certain members of council add amendments just in the past couple of weeks to add different streets or different specific addresses on to the folks that weren't given permission by right. With the regulations as they're written right now, you know, my fear would be that, you know, maybe less than 20% of the streeteries would remain. So, you know, we're really hoping to work with the city a little bit more. I mean, again, as you said, people love them. And I have to preface that by saying, you know, when most of them were built, it was in the beginning of the pandemic. They didn't know if they would be permanent or not. So you have some structures that are just gorgeous, right? And you have some structures that look like they're selling fireworks out of the back of them. So, you know, it really runs the spectrum there. But, you know, that also had to do with revenue. And you know, now that we are assured that these can be permanent, these operators can make that investment, you know, to make them nicer. However, I mean, we're still coming out of this pandemic, and you know, people are still in that survival stage. So you know, we want to get this moved along as quickly as possible. So, you know, I have we sent out a update. We sent out a questionnaire last week to everybody. I mean, not just restaurant operators, but, you know, I got a lot of feedback from neighbors and everything after they got to see the regulations. And, you know, we had the list of, you know, the biggest concerns from the operators out there.
Thank you. So, Kat, I have some follow-up questions on that, but Kat, do you want to come over here and preview this other activity that folks can start to weigh in on?
Sure. I just want to say I love seeing everybody's thoughts pop up on this, and we're going to review everything you said. And I think a lot of what people have brought up aligns with some of our own ideas of what the top concerns were. So now our thought in this exercise is we have about a handful of images here, and let's talk about some of them. The way we're going to decide what we want to talk about is just move your cursor over, grab a yellow dot, and just drag it onto the image that we want to talk about. The ones that have the most feedback, we are going to talk about as a group, okay? So from our earlier conversation, there's a number of different things in addition to just design that we were thinking about when we were looking at these specific examples. And they're noted a little bit further to the left on the frame if you want to look. I read through some of the design considerations, but I'm also going to read down the rest of them. We're thinking about mobility, property and code compliance, as well as safety, security, and health on these. So obviously we want to think about accessibility in general within the streetery and the effect on the adjacent sidewalks, and the floor level is related to the sidewalk. What does that joint look like? There's also something to think about the competition of the other street uses, loading, delivery, vending, and parking. and many constructions around inspection, certification of heating, ventilation, and construction quality. I saw a bunch of people noted in our sticky exercise, durability of materials, selection of materials. We definitely agree with that. How do these streeteries overlap with other properties and their interaction with zoning? And then some conversation about, like, what do we think about dedicating public street to private owners? As has come up a bunch of times here, there's a concern about protection from vehicle strikes, and what design solutions can we offer that are improvement on the Jersey barrier? I'm sure we can come up with something. But at the same time, you need access to fire hydrants, utilities, water cable, electric, sewer. If these streeters are going to be heated, what does that look like? Fuel and power type used. Another one I saw pop up in the chat: transparency and visibility obstruction. We've talked about it from the user point of view and to be able to see through them from the sidewalk or from the street, but also from the motorist to see. And I noticed in the chat somebody mentioned waiting at a bus stop, so that's definitely a question of safety. More about heating and cooling, airflow, and all that related to COVID and general health. More on the transparency, like, does it block the view of the sidewalk or the storefront from the roadway? As Philip brought up, we want to think about that it's safe and sanitary, no vermin infestation, it's not combustible, and what do these things look like at night when they're not in use? So how's everybody doing on this exercise? We doing okay dragging our dots over? See, some are more popular.
So I think, Prima, I wanted to follow up a little bit with what Ben was talking about and move to you. You know, the Center City District, you focus on clean, safe, and attractive. Those are parts of your mission with the Center City District. These objects, you know, they're not used all day. They have a nightlife. They have, you know, 24-hour presence. And I just wanted to get your take on those elements, both outside of hours and what these items mean for these different sort of street lives that they have.
Sure. I was just texting Nate Hummel. I'm not a designer and I don't know why I'm on this panel because I'm not sure what I have to add. But, you know, I tend to think about this stuff more in terms of stewardship and vitality. And so something that I've been thinking a lot about, which I guess is kind of a design issue, is what do these look like when they're not in use? You know, I've walked by a whole bunch of these in Center City that are just glorious, and I've had some of the best meals of the last 2 years in these. But, you know, I also hear from retailers that the roofs obstruct visibility, and it's affecting their ability to either lease retail spots or attract shoppers. So I think a lot about, as charming as the roof structures are, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to only allow those seasonally and have them have to be removed. I guess a topless streetery, if you will. But I also think we just need to sort of think about what they look like when they're not occupied. That's what I think a lot about, because, you know, we have seen a lot of them in Center City with unintended consequences that are, you know, occupied by the unhoused, et cetera, perhaps creating an unsafe situation in certain places based on, you know, people sort of able to duck in there and not a lot of visibility. So I think that's kind of the way I tend to think a lot about these. And I will say I'm just so torn on the structures because they're so lovely to be inside, but I'm not sure that they're additive to the block where there are other retailers and there are other sort of competing uses.
I think that's sort of where you're sort of getting into Beige's territory of the Arts Commission and understanding anything that's on or above the right of way. So Beige, do you want to follow up on that, since you're going to single-handedly review each one of these things?
That's funny. Sure, the Art Commission in all of its review types is reviewing for the visual impact on the public realm. So one of my sticky notes on the other board was just a hope that the visual impact of all these streeteries is seeing people enjoying the street environment, and the visual impact of the structure itself is secondary to the visual impact of seeing people out on our commercial corridors. So we're gonna try to get the highest level of transparency possible and try to have that contextual compatibility with the architecture and the streetscape, and deference to the built environment that's already there.
Paige, may I ask, in April, I would imagine you're gonna be flooded with 800 permits. Will there be some type of guidance for these operators? Because a lot of them are gonna say, listen, I have some resources to fix them up. It was 7 feet before, I now have to make it 6 feet. I was, too close to a hydrant, so I'm gonna move it, but generally I'm gonna keep it a lot like it is right now. Depending, will you all provide just some guidance for these guys, knowing that what they have to do to get your seal of approval?
Yeah, I can only speak towards the Art Commission's review, which is a small sliver of the whole, all the other city department reviews. But all the Art Commission staff, we're experienced design professionals, and we've been working for the city for many years. And a large part of our jobs is working with applicants to reach design solutions that everyone's comfortable with, so we can move project forward. We all want to just move the projects forward. We want to do it as efficiently as possible. We don't want to hold them up unnecessarily. And we have a lot of years of experience of finding solutions so we can move projects forward.
Cool.
So if anyone's having trouble with the yellow dots, sometimes if you right click, it might allow you to edit it or select it, and sometimes your cursor gets locked out. I'm not sure why that's happening, but give that go. Try to right click and see if it'll select it all. I will reshare the link if for some reason there was a link problem. Although that probably shouldn't be it. So let's dive in here. Just looking at ones that have a bunch of comments. This is one that I reacted to. I saw it a while ago and was really interested in it. Anyone feel free to throw your, oh, if you have a hand and not a cursor, try coming up here and clicking on this arrow. Because if you click between a hand and an arrow, you'll have the actual arrow to select. So try that out. Kirsten, I hope that fixes your problem. So please raise your hand if you want to, if one of these is your dot and you have something to say about what attracted you to this. We're not just talking about what's good, but what's questionable and what needs to be further determined. So as we go through these, please feel free to raise a hand, and I'll ask you to unmute as we're looking at these. Someone from the DAG group, I know this was one that we spent a good time talking about. Anyone from that group, George, Lori, have anything to say about this one as we start talking about these?
I'll say something really quickly about this one is I think part of the reason people are responding to it and acknowledging that the yellow dot could mean you hate it or you love it, but I feel like we like this one. So you get a nice dining experience, but as has come up throughout the chat and throughout our sticky exercises, we're really not obstructing the view of the building at all. Like, I think it's a win on both of those fronts, and we have major transparency and openness. This is hitting a lot of those points.
I think we noticed a lot in these images that we've looked at, and this was what a lot of our meetings was looking at photos and arguing and discussing them. Was something can be transparent, but not necessarily open. And when you view it from the wrong angle, it suddenly gets opaque in a hurry. So talking about seasonality and whether you require demountable glazing in a way that would make these things wide open, not just transparent for a lot of the year.
I think speaking maybe for some of the architects, I think a lot of architects like this because it was a very efficient and minimal use of materials for what it accomplished. I think a lot of restaurateurs would probably not like it because the density of customers is fairly low. And of course, there's no heating or cooling provided, which is potentially an issue if indeed it has a roof.
Kirsten, I know your mouse isn't working or your cursor isn't working. Do you want to share your thoughts on this one? So a comment in the chat. Can also move around. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just with the TP one that you just had, that would work on a sidewalk, but not on a street. It doesn't really seem to have the safety barriers that some do that are out in the street. But I seem to recall that we discussed the simplicity of this being very nice, but at the same time, there might be some kind of conflict with the existing architecture possible.
Yeah, I actually have a sidebar comment to this design. We early on we were approached by a restaurateur that actually they posed a greater question. One of those was what happens to the materials and what's the sustainability of these projects, these streeteries after COVID moves on or if Philly changes their laws and their regs. And he was really sensitive, and that group was really sensitive about the materiality and the reuse of these. And this reminds me because this was one of our designs. We did not design this, but we designed this A-frame structure that had a second life where the actual A-frame was going to be metal, and that was going to be donated to an organization to create swings for neighborhoods that needed them. And unfortunately, the project didn't move forward. And that was because there was budget. There was a sizable budget that was allocated, but in the end, the restaurateur did not want to take the gamble that the city of Philadelphia was going to have them pull it down because the regulatory practice was relatively new. And we were getting some pushback for putting these up without proper permits. So it's kind of interesting. But the main point here that may not have been mentioned was like what happens to the materials, and do these have a second life if they're temporary, moving forward?
Be a moderator.
So I'd like to jump in here. I designed and built this one myself. And it's a simple A-frame, and we used 12 2x4s. And I think that we have a lot of flexibility what we can do. I can't use the yellow dots, but wanted something simple, wanted something elegant, wanted something that had as few materials as possible. So if you have any questions about this specific one, I can answer all of them.
Hey,
Thank
Kyle,
you.
how tall is that, Kyle?
Thank you. So we used 2x4x14s, and they're about 12.5 feet tall.
So, I mean,
And
you could adjust them to make them 10 feet to fit in the parameters, right?
Yeah, I suppose that we could have, but they take up a lot of space as is. And that was one of the concerns from this specific client at Pinefish, is that they wanted to have more usable space. They're also pretty inconvenient for servers because they need to duck under the A-frame to get to the clients. So there's ups and downs.
And to answer Kirsten's question, this is open on the street side and on the sidewalk side.
No, it's not technically open on this. It's open on the streets, on the sidewalk side, but there is a marine vinyl that's been used.
Okay, so there is a sheet. Oh yeah, you can see the sheen on it. Yeah, there's a sheeting down there. Okay.
Yeah, but also this was built, in the early days of the pandemic. So we really wanted to make sure that, unlike a lot of the streeteries that were built, that there was solid airflow. So we left the top open, but we definitely have the barrier down below.
So Beige is asking, could this be like a flat pack solution where these could be built to essentially hinge?
Yes, they could be. So they could be built on a hinge. It would provide some bigger issues. Again, this is one of the things that we just wanted to put together as quickly as possible for the restaurant to continue thriving. But also a lot of the specs were just based on, kind of the parameters that we were given, and also not needing to cut the roofing at all. So we just built it to that length and kept it at that length. It's easier.
Thank you. So let's jump around. I saw there's a comment about people's preferences. So I'm going to put a little roof and I'm going to put a no roof over here. So feel free to grab or copy a dot and put that over next to the one that you prefer as we go. So that's down there for your consideration.
Kyle, your A-frame design that we were just talking about, how long do you think it will look nice and clear like that? And how easy would it be to replace those materials if they do yellow, when they do yellow?
So the polycarbonate roofing will last for a very, very, very long time. So we're only seeing one angle. They also have 3 more A-frames built on the other side, and we use something that is tinted gray because it was the sunny side. It's the marine vinyl that generally lasts about 16 to 18 months, depending on wear and tear, but it's all easily replaceable.
I have
I want to jump.
I
Yeah,
just
go
have
ahead.
another question on that. When this was designed, does it go through structural review? And like in the instance, if we have because we do get hurricanes that come through, what are these being designed to? What design standards?
I'll be honest. I mean, it's made it through one hurricane at least. But when this was built in the very early days where there was less regulation, and it was just a very basic A-frame. I don't know if there's any code that would allow for something like this, or that's maybe y'all know better than I do.
Yeah, I'm just thinking from a liability standpoint, if it were to fly away,
Not going to
in
fly
heavy
away.
wind, or
It's
tip over on somebody.
Also, it's not going to tip over. It has been anchored with
Okay.
bolts into the street.
Okay. So yeah, I guess that just kind of begs the question of from the security standpoint, what kind of structural expectations are we having besides, these units, withstanding car impact, but also, tipping over or anything, what kind of anchoring do they have?
Yeah, the anchoring is 10-inch Titans that have been driven into the ground all the way. We also use concrete epoxy, but to answer your question about car impact, nothing would survive car impact. Cars won't survive car impact. That's a difficult question. It's a simple A-frame built out of 2x4s. We just make it as visible as possible.
And this is a kind of a general question to the larger masses. If let's say there is a fatality, does this become the liability to the restaurant owner? Does it become a liability to the city because it's on public land? Does anybody know how that works?
I don't have an answer there. If someone has my guess is it would go towards the restaurant business. I see Ben half nodding. But I think that is the new regulations and some of the insurance requirements being put on the structures that's what it is meant to consider.
Okay.
I would just jump in It's not hard to imagine a situation where literally everyone who's touched this gets sued. I don't think it would be limited to one party. I think everyone would be involved.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I kind of feel like, yeah, I'm a licensed professional and it makes me uncomfortable. It would make me feel uncomfortable to stamp a drawing on something like this if someone were to get hit. But there seems like there's a lack of standards right now. So that could be argued.
Yeah, I was going to ask Nate, do you want to unmute and talk a little bit? I know you've put a number of these parklets into practice and some of the steps that you've taken to make sure they're sort of best case scenario on the design.
So I'm sorry, can you say me? I was just coming in on something else.
So just you've done a number of parklets and put things in the street for some time, and just talk through the process that you went through about on the sort of safety related to design side and getting them approved and making sure they have those, they meet certain standards.
So I think that when it all started, it was the streets department wanted us to be, everything was protected like a fortress. And then Mario and his team kind of came up with this idea that you could do those planters around it. And so that was one way they really kind of figured out that trick that you could do that by reducing the seating space a little bit and allowing more space. I think to us, the most important thing for these is that things have to be modular and replaceable. If it's a standard unit, I think anybody that's ever designed something like this understands that, but maybe not in the restaurant industry, that maybe not as clear. But if these things are monumental units that are expensive to build and maybe they look great, but if they get hit by a truck in the middle of the night and somebody comes in the morning and you need to replace the whole thing, that's a real problem. But if you can replace certain components and just that general nature, by designing things to be modular in that way, it makes them easier for all of these other things everybody's worried about. How to remove it quickly if there's a hurricane coming, how to do, whatever these other things we're hearing about this, other potential issues with that. I think the modularity is something that we really found becomes the most efficient way to get these approved. And then I guess when you have the city going through it, you have to kind of work with them to think about what are the parameters that they're worried about, I guess. And a lot of times it's those cars coming in and crashing it from the ends. And so that's one thing we've had to work on our University City District parklets over the years, is trying to establish the ends to be a little bit more robust. And so I guess by the city requiring a protection on three sides is kind of that. We used to have wheel stops and other things that would stop cars from coming in. And I wonder if that's something that we want to explore a little bit more than having barriers around all sides exposed. Because if we're really worried about parked cars gently nudging these things, we don't need to have a full Jersey barrier. We could get by with a wheel stop and something that's a little bit less visually obstructive. So I think these practical solutions that are around that are easily working solutions. So I think the key is, though, when anybody's talking with the city regular, anybody like this, meet them where they are, understand why they might be worried about this. Don't assume they're trying to kill your creativity. Think like, okay, what is the legitimate concern here? What are they worried about? We're talented designers. How can we get around that? How can we solve for that problem? I think that's a more healthy approach than looking at them saying, oh, here's another burdensome thing that we have to get around when it comes to it. So again, we've experimented on things for ours that are, parklets are very different than streeteries, but I think philosophically they're the same thing. The big difference is ours had to come in the winters. And so that kind of led us to that modular design where we had to lift them up and they couldn't be too heavy and all those things. So that means that's another thing. When you have these things to store, you have to have a place to store them. We, UCD, have a warehouse. Not every restaurant has a warehouse. I can't imagine new Americans, first generation restaurant owners have a warehouse that they can just put the stuff in. So that's a real thing to consider. We have that, and it's space constraints for us as well. So again, something to think about. If these things have to move, where do they go? All of that stuff. Who installs these? Are they the restaurant crew? Is this a big team that comes in? Hurricane comes, are there 800 contractors that come and clear every streetery in the city? I don't know. There's so many questions with all this stuff. But I think we can all work together and try and
So I want
I
to,
think it's good.
I
It's
want to
have to be a
jump,
work in progress.
I want to jump to another image, but before we do that, I'm putting a link in the chat, and Kat's going to explain it and just sort of adding in layers upon layers of what we're talking about here. Are some of the other guidelines, some of the things Philadelphia's done in some other cities. So Kat, do you want to just talk through what we're looking at and some of the other advice out there?
Right, so we just wanted to show you guys some of what Philly has already put together, and I only picked 2 slides out of the whole presentation because it's over 60 pages long. So on the left, where you can see these yellow pages, that's Philadelphia issued. They've given a sidewalk or a streetery example, and this is our first round guidance, and then below some text about it. And then the right, you can see other examples that other cities have done. Part of the reason I wanted to pull this together is so that we could have a sense of what the deliverables might be and how we can support not only the city legislation, but also restaurateurs and building practical designs that meet all the legislation. But I think the great reason to talk about it right now is in the center, you can see one modular design done by LA. And I definitely encourage you guys to check out the Dropbox link because we have a bunch of the city's complete documents file. This is just one page out of LA. And so they've done a bunch of modular designs, have some thoughtful graphic overlays on it, and they're well thought out. They do have some safety components, whether they'll meet Philly's guidelines, not sure, but they have thought through it all.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting pieces in each of them. I think San Francisco has some really interesting considerations about fire and emergency, how they deal with these elements, and they have some nice standard details to how a streetery can be elevated, meet the sidewalk in an accessible way while still providing a conduit for water to move. You know, when we looked at some of the streets in Philly, for me, I think of Sansom Street, like around City Hall, that street is just kind of always wet because, you know, we've some of the restaurants have gone to the extent of raising these platforms, but without a typical, you know, strong detail to keep those gutter edges moving. It's you know, it's a problem. So San Francisco has thought out a lot of those items in an interesting way. And LA has a nice sort of branded approach to these. And on the safety side, both LA and San Francisco have the curb stop, and then the I always forget the name of it, and Nate reminds me, but the little bicycle lane plastic pillar on the corner.
Flexible delineator posts, Eli. Flexible delineator posts.
Thank you. On the spot. Thank you. But yeah, so both of those cities have taken that approach as the safety guideline, but you can read about some of the different cities' approaches in there. So yeah, so go take a look, click that link. Let's go back in here and dive in.
Just one more comment on that from the chat to Kirsten. Yeah, I believe all these documents that we're showing are all pre-COVID. The only exception to my knowledge is Boston, who actually engaged an architect to release COVID guidelines on the spot, but the rest of them were all pre-COVID.
So feel free again, please raise a hand, unmute, jump in on this design here. We're at least 5 of you were interested in saying something. Philip, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would recommend that any recommended materials be easily power washed, be able to be easily power washed. The urban environment is really rough on materials and things get dirty really easily. That's why bus stops are made out of you know, painted metal or a really sturdy material that a crew can come and just power wash the hell out of them and go away. Wood like this, especially decking wood that's not sort of like treated with like a nice sturdy polyurethane or something like that, can really absorb stains, especially in a restaurant environment where things get tipped over, food is spilled and whatnot. And if those materials can't be power washed and still, you know, look good season after season, then they're just going to look pretty soiled pretty fast.
Agreed on that. I think that there are, from the criteria that we established, this one meets a lot of them in terms of engaging with the sidewalk, providing some openness and having the visibility. These partitions look like COVID temporary partitions that could come down, so you still have some spacing, but you're not having those solid panels there. So I think that there's a lot to like. Feel free, keep putting the hands up. I appreciate the feedback as we all talk about these. Katrina, I missed your comment before we jumped off of LA. Do you want to talk about dual duty of elements and bike racks?
Hey, sure. I just really liked that image that we were looking at before of the modular design that we were on the other page. Yeah, I think the dual usage of the bike racks at the end, we were talking about cars getting too close, maybe nudging some of these things. That provides a great double duty. You can get bike parking in there and also protect the edges. So I just wanted to bring that up, that looks like a great solution.
Thank you. Someone whose name is only iPhone has their hand raised. So fire away.
Hi, my name's Becky, and I run the Random Tea Room in Northern Liberties, and I've really been wanting to put a streetery out front, but I'm also really into recycling and not being wasteful. I was wondering if using the barrier areas as an opportunity for storage space is something that is viable. I was thinking of collaborating with Rabbit Recycling to offer my customers a discount to bring in like specific recycling so that's easier for them to process, and like storing it in the barrier areas. Is that something that would be acceptable in your minds?
I think Aaron had commented above it about some specific like quantities of water and weight of barrier. Aaron, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that comment at all, but I think it's an interesting approach where you're building depth and into this system, and certainly those recyclable areas become nice collapsible impact zones.
Yeah, I'm probably the least knowledgeable person about crash-worthy barriers, but when I had asked about why they had to be completely protected within inches of each other around the entire exterior, I was told that there's something about the amount of weight that is held in these barriers that provides that crash-worthy capability, and that's really what was important to especially the streets department in terms of protecting the people sitting. So that's all I know. I'm sorry, I wish I had more information.
I think dropping down to this image here, going back to what Mario was talking about earlier about planners as barriers, this one, it really gives the whole picture of a dense green attractive area, and you can imagine those things weigh a ton and could get to the weight necessary to be considered passable as a barrier.
Yeah, the bigger question is who wants to sign off on an alternative, and what's going to be.
So I think the question,
sign off on an alternative barrier.
I think the answer is you're not going to necessarily find someone. I think it's going to be incumbent upon streets to say, if your thing is, fits in a box this size and weighs more than this, you're there. I think you can make some guidelines to say you don't have to have a structural engineer verify it, but that you've reached a threshold if this thing weighs 400 pounds or whatever it is, so that you take that step out of the hands of both the restaurateurs and as well as the design professionals who are like, I don't want to sign off on this.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like at the end of the day, anybody can get sued. So, if you're a design professional and you have, your license, like health, safety, and welfare is the bare minimum, right? So like when we, like, you know, I'm a landscape architect, and anything that I design for the public realm is viable for scrutiny, or, you know, open for, if something wrong happens, I can be sued or held liable. So regardless if I stamped it or not sometimes. So yeah, it's a weird line. I think that needs to be figured out.
Oh, and I see your hand up. We noticed that we're getting some additional comments on these considerations. Feel free to drag a sticky note over and add to this list. I'm glad that happened organically. And if you have more for us, please throw them onto that list with the sticky note. So yeah, Owen, you want to unmute?
Yeah, and I just wanted to put in here. I have El Camino. I designed and built the structure, my streetery, and I kind of question what we're talking about if the parameters are, you know, 6 foot maximum depth into the street and 20 foot from crosswalks, you know, the parameters that the city set, to then get barriers on 3 sides, and, you know, all of this. These things shrink down to, I think, a useless size. And, you know, right now I've got barriers kind of built into my structure, and barriers on each end. I think, you know, I also have Jersey barriers, because the second street where we were, when I put this together, I was thinking that, you know, it's a highway basically. But, you know, without the Jersey barriers, if we had to put Jersey barriers in within that 6 foot parameter, then we're not really out into the parking lane. You know, we've got 4 feet. And then all of the design that we're talking about is kind of chucked out the window. That's my real big concern here.
No, and I agree. I agree with you. Go for it, Kat.
I'd like to respond to that really quick, just to say the city regulations have been a complete moving target the entire time. And so why don't we, as a united front, weigh in on what it needs to be? I think we can tell them, we can push back on it a little bit if we have a clear reason. And I think you're totally right.
So do you want to?
And also,
go ahead, Owen.
Just real quick, you know, part of the design should also incorporate, and, you know, the safety of the designs is experienced throughout the pandemic with all of these streeteries that have been put up. How are they getting crashed into all the time? And, you know, is that an actual issue that we have to address? You know, if we are expected to put a bond up and then be insured, which we are, you know, how is the experience of the past 2 years affecting the design criteria, or is it? Or we're just kind of randomly putting things out there, and that we meaning the city.
So I think, Kat, do you want to talk a little bit about where we're going with this project and how we're trying to, you know, I'm not going to say answer that question, because who knows how it will be answered, but what we're trying to do to influence those decisions?
Right, so as we talked about on the left, we've had these design considerations that we've been working through. And here we are looking at examples of existing streeteries and see what works and what doesn't. And then like, as we looked at the other images before of what other cities ended up with as deliverables, what type of deliverables can we offer back to the city? Would that be pre-approved designs that are done by architects and ready to go that the art commission will sign off on? Is it something modular? Is it just details of how something would be anchored or how a platform would be built to allow for sewage and power washing underneath? So I don't know, Ela, I think you can expand on that.
Yeah, and I think as this has been a sort of moving target of a process, it will be a moving target of a solution. This is the first of these, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to talk to us about this. And our hope is that we can do this again in the spring and do it again in the summer as we sort of scope out the landscape of what ends up in the being enforced and what we're trying to push, because our goal is to come to some design guidelines where we say, the regulations are over here. Here is what's appropriate from a design perspective and from a consistency perspective and from a buildability perspective. Because, with enforcement and with the changes that are going to inevitably happen as these things start needing more scrutiny and needing more approvals, things are going to change. So I think DAG's goal, and I'll put my email in the chat, Kat, I'll put yours in as well. If you want to attend our meetings and weigh in, or just send us a long email about your concerns and what we can do to address them, we would, we're eager to continue that conversation.
And I would say again, to encourage all of you to look at that Dropbox folder, just of a handful of cities where we've collected what they have put together. And obviously many cities have been working on solutions for this. I think we can all learn from each other and just pull some lessons from other cities to figure out what works for us.
One comment that I've seen in the chat that we haven't talked about that maybe we could talk about in the future is the concept of sustainable heating and cooling using the environment rather than energy to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a question about about seasonality, and once you have this, it's a limited sample, but I think 5 out of 6 people here are in the no roof camp, and heating and cooling goes a very different way when you don't have those things, and you're limited to solar shading and the occasional fan. So I think that is a big topic, and as we look at, this was an image we spent some time on, with the necessity of that mechanical room when you have any sort of a forced air system and what that does for those issues of openness and transparency. It's a challenge and it's a problem, and again, these were constructed during pandemic need, so that was a necessary thing to make sure these things could have that 4-season use. So we're in that pivot moment about where those systems go.
I think a related issue, Lori, is that there's still not clear standards about what should be done about anti-COVID or safe ventilation. I mean, I've been looking at the ASHRAE standards for an enclosed space, for an office space, and they're really centric towards filtering. And of course, filtering works if you have a sealed building or an enclosed space, and you can control the air in it and filter it. The idea of building a shed outside and then enclosing it, and I've seen some that are enclosed on all sides, and then putting sort of an ad hoc heating system in it. There's a question of what standards is any of this meeting, including the safety. Just building a shed outside does not provide a safe place to eat, in my opinion. It does not inherently provide a safe place to eat. I think many of the people who have done this have tried to follow the guideline of keeping it open at least on one side.
Anne, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of pose a quick question to the restaurateurs. There are all these considerations on the design, which obviously is very important, but I guess like maybe taking a step back and talking about what the needs are, like what are the objectives? So, we're talking about roofs and, heating and that sort of thing. In a, post-COVID world, is the intention to have outdoor seating in the winter? It was necessary during COVID, but like moving forward, is there an intention to have seating outside? Because then that kind of, I think, helps frame the conversation a little bit more. Just some thoughts.
Oh, and you want to follow up there?
Yeah, I think, having outdoor seating extending into 4 seasons, but 3 seasons certainly is as a restaurateur something that I think is a great advantage for the restaurant, but also for the public. This city does not generally below 60 degrees have people sitting outside. Cities all over all over Europe do in winter time. So again, this has been really great for me to see people out in 40-degree weather. We've supplied some heat and heated seats and cover and wind cover, and yes, I think that it is. I think a really important part of what these structures will do moving forward is to allow for multi-season, if not 4-season dining.
And if I can just chip in real quick, there are a couple things that the pandemic changed for restaurants and things that are going to be a lot more robust now. One is takeout, to go, and delivered food. We weren't always accustomed to getting all this food delivery back in the day. QR codes for menus. The list goes down of things that we've changed our mind about restaurants. And one of the main things that not just in Philadelphia, but all across the country is 4-season outdoor dining, to bring that European model into our bigger cities. We've, as Owen said, guests are still interested in dining outside in the cold weather. I don't think this is something that's going to be going away. And, I welcome it.
Appreciate that. I wanted to touch on David's question. Is there any consideration for these building requirements based on the width of the streets where streeters are built, how much traffic, 2 lanes versus 1 lane, and volume? Well, one thing we've discussed internally is tying it to the Complete Streets handbook and the different types of streets that are documented within there. That may not be specific enough. It may be, right of way width that we need to consider, but I certainly see benefit in that. If you're trying to put something on, Washington Ave, to name an incredibly third rail topic right now, or a small street in South Philly or Northern Liberties, you have very different conditions, and I think that it's absolutely appropriate that the solutions be different as we're considering it. So yeah, David, I think that's a good point and a good question, and one where one size doesn't necessarily fit all. Sarah Shu, you wanna follow up?
Sure, I will. I feel pretty strongly that we don't need to be building more buildings on the streetscape. We need to build places for people. And I think seating on the streetscape should stick around for in perpetuity, to Anne's point. Like, I feel like that's a goal. We want that. We want people on the street. We want them enjoying it, like creating all the things that everybody said about why we want to be in the urban environment. But I don't think that our end goal should be about how to design guidelines for building a shed on the street. I think it should be about building places for people to be in with some alternates for how do you handle the occasional rain. And you know, when I was at Soraya and we ate out in the garden and it did start to pour in an instant, and we were sort of trapped momentarily under our little cover, and it was so warm and we wanted to stay out there, and we kept trying till it was really getting wet, and then the waiter came with an umbrella and brought us inside. But I feel like we have solutions. You know, umbrellas have been used for a long time. I don't think we want to get into this mode where we're talking about the streetscape as having this parallel building model that runs along where the cars do. I think we want to think about outdoor spaces for people to be in. As a landscape architect, I think of them more like gardens and not like sheds. There were a few on that. I will admit I was charmed by the A-frame. I find that transparent A-frame just to be a charming thing. I think of that more like an artwork, but I feel like the places that are much more in the European mode are far more appealing to me and seem to have far less liability generally, because I think we can come up with those solutions you see in the LA model for how to create the safe buffer between cars and people. I mean, we do that all the time. That's sort of what landscape architects are busy spending their day with. I've probably said enough.
Well, and that there's a lot of parallels to parklets then, I would say, and all that work.
I think so. And I think, you know, I see a couple other people in the chat there. Like, I think there's opportunities to manage stormwater and to increase our tree canopy. I mean, generally, if we had more trees on the street, it would have been much easier to start to create those spaces for people to be in. But we have a lot of places where we don't, and we have sort of very open, sterile streetscapes. Those lent themselves really well to creating the buildings to be in during COVID. So now we're looking at a lot of
I wonder if there's an incentive system with the planting, or if you add a street tree or something, you can get a little bit more or something like that. I hadn't thought about that.
I love that.
And then if you agree to maintain it or something, there could be an incentive way to build something in that could give people a little bit more. That's interesting.
Because the tree will, it isn't going to keep people. I mean, we all know now it's not the same as it was 15 years ago when people really did worry that the tree was going to keep people from frequenting their retail establishment. Somehow the tree was going to block things and people wouldn't know their shop was there, or they wouldn't go to the restaurant. And actually it's quite the opposite. People actually want to go to a shop where it looks like an enticing streetscape, and they want to dine where they see trees on the street. Why does everyone want to sit outside around Rittenhouse Square? It's beautiful. So, you know, I think that's what we take away from this, that people do want to be outside dining and would probably choose that over being inside. You know, COVID aside, they would probably choose that anyway if it was a beautiful day and, you know, the weather cooperated, right? And it's such a, you know, there's a different kind of quality of dining when you're outside. I'm just going to say that I do like Mario was doing those pre-COVID. I think a lot of those translated really well, perhaps needed umbrellas, but I think you saw a much easier, seamless moving into that. I'm thinking like Shake Shack or whatever, those kinds of places that had some of those.
Yeah, for sure.
I just also want to say this was so amazing that we kept taking screenshots while everybody's mouses were on moving the dots and writing in. This was the greatest thing to see a bunch of designers basically putting on a virtual webinar for largely a lot of designers, and we all love these.
I can't see Kat. Her smile must be so big.
Yay!
This is the best. So I just want to say thank you. This has been awesome.
So glad you liked it. And also, Sarah, I think you made a lot of great points. And I think you're kind of outlining our challenges, like how do we want to support the city legislation? What deliverables do we want to offer? What statement does DAG want to make that hit at some of those points that you're talking about? So those are kind of the next steps for us here. And
I just want to pose like a really weird question. Would all of this not be a problem if we just bumped the curb out?
If there's a curb extension, are you saying?
Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
then it's a sidewalk permit. Then at that point, it's a sidewalk permit.
Yeah.
Or cafe permit.
Right.
I think strategically that is a good idea, and is something that we've considered. We talk about, there are comments up above. I think Kyle made that comment about like if 8 inches is good enough to protect a sidewalk from the street, why do we need a Jersey barrier to protect a streetery?
I love that comment. I love the sentiment of it, and I really want to like own it. But the curb does go down about 2 feet below, and I've had that conversation with the city before. So we've had Mario came up with an interesting solution that was sort of a way around that, I guess. It was like it looked like a curb. It was a folded aluminum piece that had the same bevels as a curb. We ran it along the length of our parklets and had these little tongues that went under the weight of it, and that made it through streets engineering when they were really worried about stuff. And that was a pretty kind of inexpensive solution. It was aluminum, but it was a solution that worked. And it met their needs, because what we were determining is the end collisions are what they're really worried about. And if anybody has seen what happened to Prohibition Tap Room's beautiful streetery got destroyed because a car hit it from the end overnight. And then increasingly there's just the impacts that would happen along the length of the parklet weren't as much of a concern as the head-on stuff. And so I think the length of it could be lower, and then the higher barriers are on the ends, and that could be a solution. And so again, there are ways around that. And I think Mario, if I'm correct, you did not have to sign that or any. It wasn't you didn't have to seal it or anything and say I verify this is a safe barrier. I don't think they made us do that at that point, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the whole thing, we had to sign off on the whole thing. But yes, that was, I think that.
Hey, he's still in business. He is not in jail.
That's right. But you are correct. I mean, the importance of that was, traffic was traveling, and it was about a car veering into a parklet or a streetery as opposed to a front-on collision. So, there was that, plus we had planters along that edge. There was a buffer zone. There's a bunch of things that we did to make streets comfortable.
I really love, Sarah, what you were saying. Like, everything you were saying really resonated with me, and part of me is kind of thinking like, why are we just not recapturing this for the public realm, like the pedestrian realm? And it's literally a curb that delineates that. And if you can just move that curb, you can plant trees, right? You can do so much more, and it would unlock a lot more design potential and program. So yeah, just food for thought I wanted to put out there.
So I feel like, just because we only have a few minutes left, I wanted to bring it back to our panelists and just ask, any of you guys can jump in. If there's anything throughout your process of being engaged with Streeteries up till now, if you have any lessons learned that you wanted to share with our group that maybe we haven't been thinking of. Let me see. Prima, do you want to start? Do you have anything come to mind?
Sure, I can jump in. you know, to maybe be a Philistine for a minute, I think that you can have quality or you can have quantity, right? I worry that, you know, we're talking about broad scale public policy. We're not talking about an individual design project for a client. And I think equity is really important. I think we saw equity fall a little bit by the wayside with the sort of geography and the mapping of, you know, where these are administrative and where they're not. And I think just, you know, a simple, elegant solution, a kind of a baseline solution, a kit of parts that can be used by a variety of restaurants is important. And like, you know, I'll be completely honest. I mean, you know, I'm an urban planner, I work at Center City District, but my husband and my husband's family operate 2 restaurants, and we shut down a restaurant during COVID. It is really hard out there. And so to the extent we can make barriers of entry really low and make these accessible to as many restaurants as possible, I think we go a long way.
That's a great point. David, do you want to jump in for a final comment?
I couldn't agree more with what Prima just said. I think we're an outlier, and it's hard for us to think about, you know, what I would call restaurants that are open at night, for instance, you know, need to go through. I mean, our purposes were very limited. It's basically a day business. So we basically had other concerns such as visibility during the day to make sure that, you know, we don't get hit by passing cars. So the yellow planters were important to us, but we're not open at night, you know, so there's no need for lighting at night. I mean, our thought process was very, very different. So I think our purposes, you know, were very different from what most restaurateurs are facing. And the solution we came up with is commensurate to the means that we have based on what we have to sell, right? So, I mean, the solution is always in line with our means.
Yeah, you know, and I want to piggyback on that too, because, you know, as design, I mean, we can design, you know, lots of things, right? But, you know, I think a stumbling block for restaurants and for restaurateurs, you know, are the costs to these things, right? So, you know, yes, there are innovative solutions with inexpensive materials, and they're quite elegant, you know, and then there are people that are spending a lot of money, right, on these structures. So, you know, I think for the most part, you know, the city should look at the city should look at, like, you know, how they can help financially with restaurants, right? Is there a grant program? And I know that these are like really difficult asks, but, you know, from the standpoint of, like, you know, yeah, sure, kit of parts, you know, required rules and regulations around it, like that all makes sense, but things cost money. And if things want to last, right, if they don't want to be wood, if they want to be, you know, materials that are going to last in the public realm, you know, then there has to be a little bit of investment, and that investment needs to be helped. You know, it can't just all fall on the restaurateur.
Well, I guess the case, sorry, I guess the
no,
case has to be made, you know, how does it benefit the city, right? And because there's a case to be made there, how does these streeteries also benefit the city, you know? And I think that's probably one way to convince the city that, you know, it does make sense, you know, to make those investments, or to make it easier for businesses such as restaurants to, you know, to build those, you know, those streeteries, whether it's tax revenue, whatever it is, you know, there's a case to be made, and it has to be made.
Yep, agreed.
That's a great point. Ben, do you want to jump in with a comment?
Yeah, sure. You see my head nodding so much.
It's up there.
And you know, thank you. I mean, I just can't get over the fact that, you know, a lot of you get spend an hour and a half, you know, talking about these designs, and it all comes back to supporting this great industry. I mean, restaurants are the second largest employer in Philadelphia, in the state. You know, they create communities. You guys know that. They create neighborhoods. These outdoor dining has made the city even more vibrant, and it's going to bring back travel and tourism. There's your tax dollars, right? But I just want to thank you. I mean, you guys are working also very, very hard for these anonymous or not anonymous restaurant owners out there from all over the city. And it just makes me really proud to live in the city and to have guys like you who have our back. So thank you.
No problem. Beige, any final thoughts?
It was just great hearing all these ideas and brainstorming with everyone today. I find the idea of a kit of parts that's pre-approved very appealing. And I enjoyed thinking about this idea together with the idea of complete streets and these street types that we already have formed. So maybe there's like a extra small, medium, and large kit of parts that corresponds to your street width and sidewalk width. And I enjoyed thinking about those two ideas paired together.
Paige, maybe you should say how many new staffers you're going to need to review all these if they're not pre-approved.
Yes. Thank you, Nate.
We are right at our time. I just want to thank everyone. This was a new format for us, and the engagement was great, and we want to do this again. So you've set us on the right track, everyone, for participating. Thank you to our panel for lending their expertise to us. We will be posting this on our website. So if you want to share it with anybody, this will be up in the next couple days, and you can pass that YouTube link along to whoever you like. So we will be back in March 24th. We'll be talking about the rail park, and then to all of our landscape architect friends, Hinge Collective will be with us talking about the Philadelphia tree plan in April. So we've got some fun stuff coming up, and we will be back doing more of this. And thank you everyone for taking part in it.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.